Yes, I promise we'll get to Krampus at some point in this video, but Krampus actually isn't the scariest of the creatures that I've discovered in the course of my research over the past couple of weeks of the creepiest Christmas traditions. I've focused my research mostly around Europe because those are the oldest traditions that I've been able to find, and I can assure you, some of the traditions that I've discovered are absolutely gruesome. So buckle in for this list of 7 creepy Christmas creatures that I've discovered for your enjoyment and terror. So starting off this list, we've got Grýla and her lazy husband Leppalúði, who are Icelandic mountain trolls, originating in 13th century Icelandic poetry such as Icelandic saga and Sverris saga. But they've been mostly associated with Christmas since the 17th century, and before this, Grýla was essentially a mountain troll who would eat little children, nothing more, nothing less. And her lazy husband Leppalúði would mostly sleep in a cave. But in the 17th century, the poem of Grýla, Jólasveinarnir, introduced their 13 mischievous sons, the Yule lads, who would descend one at a time into the villages, distributing presents in the shoes of well-behaved children, and they would punish the naughty ones. Yeah, you'll see that this is a recurring theme in this list. So you know the way Santa can see you when you're sleeping and when you're awake, and he knows when you've been bad or good. Well, in Iceland, it's Grýla who's watching over you all year round, making sure you've been good. And if you haven't been good, she'll come down to your house at Christmas, she'll stick you in a sack, take you back up to her mountain and cook you in a stew. So the older traditions have Grýla as a beggar, asking the parents for their children if they've been naughty during the year. But more recent traditions don't have her being quite so polite. She'll just grab you if you've been naughty. And that's before even mentioning the family cat, this gigantic, monstrous cat which comes down to the cities and, get this, will eat you if you've not received new clothes before Christmas Eve. Now, I don't know what's going on with that, but I know that I'm replacing my back door for one that doesn't have a giant cat flap. And then there's the 13 boys, right? The Yule lads. Actually, there are more than 13. Different areas of Iceland have got different Yule lads associated with them. But 13 of them became particularly popular after a famous poem was published in the 18th century, mentioning 13 specifically by name. And those names actually describe the kind of mischief that they get up to when they're not busy, placing presents in the shoes of well-behaved children and hot potatoes in the shoes of badly behaved ones. And Wikipedia's actually got a list of all the names, and I'm not going to try to pronounce the Icelandic versions, but I will give you the English translations. We've got Sheepcoat Clod, harasses sheep but is impaired by his stiff peg legs. We've got Spoon Licker, steals and licks wooden spoons, is extremely thin due to malnutrition. We've got Pot Scraper, who steals leftovers from pots. We've got Door Slammer, who likes to slam doors, especially during the night, waking people up, etc., etc. I'll leave a link down below so you can read all 13 of them. Some of them are kind of baroque. Okay, next let's have a look at the Mari Luid. So this is a tradition that comes from South Wales, and many people think that this is an old tradition that dates back to pre-Christian times, but actually won't find very many scholarly sources that agree with that today. Certainly the earliest mention of the Mari Luid that we have today dates back only to 1800. But it's a fascinating tradition where they get the skull of a horse and they place that horse's skull on a pole and they dress it all up with ribbons, and they place big glass orbs in the eye sockets, and then they'll place a long white veil on the back of the skull, right? They'll attach it to the skull, and then man gets underneath, and sometimes if the setup is particularly clever, they'll have a little rod to open and close the Mari Luid's mouth, and they'll be accompanied by 3 to 6 other men. Some of them will be dressed in traditional Welsh clothing. Some of them may be dressed up as Punch and Judy, and you have to pay particular attention if there is a Punch among the cohort for reasons that I'll explain in a second. But the thing that they do is that they go round from house to house singing and asking for entry into the house. So they'll sing this special Mari Luid song, and then the household owners will sing a response. Well, traditionally they'll refuse entry at least the first few times, and then the Mari Luid will ask again for entry, and this will go backwards and forwards until one side or the other gives up. But if the Mari Luid is allowed inside the house, then it'll go around terrorizing all the little children that might be around, and possibly the adults as well. And this is where it's important to notice if there's a Punch, because the Punch must be forced to swear to not touch the fireplace before entering, because if you don't make him sweat, then he'll rake out any ashes in the fireplace and make a terrible mess. Now, the cohort will no doubt sing more songs and entertain the family, and they will stay until given food and ale. And once they're satisfied, they'll move on to the next household. So there you are, that's the Mari Luid, this spectral horse figure. Now, some people say that the name Mari Luid may come from simply Mary, right, the mother of Jesus. But some people think that it may be a bastardization of the English word mare, the female of the horse. That would make sense, right? Grey mare. Maybe. So something that I discovered about the Mari Luid, which was kind of interesting to me, is that at least in one source, it states that the skull of the horse should be buried in the earth for the whole year and only dug up for Christmas, which is interesting because it may point to some chthonic magical practices related to the earth. All right, next up we've got Befana, who goes around the houses of Italy leaving sweets in the shoes of well-behaved children and lumps of coal and sticks in the shoes of badly behaved children. This happens all over Italy on the 6th of January, which corresponds to the feast of Epiphany. So while in many other places in the world it's the three wise men who are associated with Epiphany, in Italy it's La Befana. And actually her name may be a bastardization of the word Epiphany, La Befana, Epifania. It's not impossible. One tradition that's associated with La Befana is that she's an excellent housekeeper and she'll sweep your house clean before leaving for another house. So yes, clearly better house manners than the Mari Luid, and she's welcome to my house anytime she likes, even if it's to leave a piece of coal, which I probably deserve. And typically families will leave a glass of wine and some local delicacies for her to eat. So one tradition that's worth noting is that she does not like to be looked at. So if you spot her and she sees you looking at her, she'll take a broomstick and she'll whack you with it. I mean, there's introvert and then there's introvert, am I right? I like this little tidbit that I found on Wikipedia. Let me share this with you. All Italian children may expect to find a lump of coal in their stockings, actually rock candy, made black with food colouring, as every child has been at least occasionally bad during the year. Yes, as I say, she's definitely welcome to my house anytime she likes, at least more welcome than our next Christmas fiend, Frau Perchta. Traditional in Bavaria and in Austria, so she's an alpine goddess associated with being the guardian of the beasts. So she would be the southern equivalent of the northern Germanic goddess Holda. So Berchta's name is probably associated with the German word for Epiphany, which is Berchtentag. And she's got mainly two forms. One form as a tall, beautiful woman, as white as snow, and the second form as an old hag. Now, she's also often represented with the disfigured face of a goat, with a long tongue and crooked horns, and the long neck of a giraffe in her form as the guardian of the beasts. And she's also often represented with an abnormally large foot, so the foot of a swan or a goose, marking her out as a shapeshifter, as a higher being, and also as a spinning woman with splay foot from working the treadle so hard. So here's the thing about this delightful lady. Apart from being an upholder of the local taboos, such as no spinning during the holidays, she'll also keep an eye on any children and any young servants in the household throughout the year. And in the days between Christmas and Epiphany, she'll come into the household, and if the child or young servant has been very good and worked very, very hard, she'll leave maybe a silver coin in their shoe or in a bucket. But if they haven't been good and worked very hard, she will take her knife and disembowel them, replacing their innards with straw and pebbles. One of the things she'd pay particular attention to would be to make sure that every girl in the household had woven her allotted quota of flax or wool throughout the year, and she'd also make sure that nobody had eaten anything other than gruel and fish during her specific feast. Yes, I think if I had to choose between a coal-coloured piece of rock candy on the one side and disembowelment on the other, the choice would be pretty easy to make. Okay, I know you've all been waiting for Krampus, the half-goat demon who follows St. Nicholas around in Austria, in Slovenia, in Croatia, and in northern Italy, dragging his chains behind him and scaring little children into obeying their parents. And while St. Nicholas goes around giving sweets and gifts to the well-behaved children, Krampus goes around with his birch rod whipping the naughty ones. Now, I don't know if you know this, but the tradition of Krampus may date back to the 6th or 7th centuries, but we don't have any primary sources that mention him before the 16th century. And in fact, Krampus may have been a variation on Frau Perchta, which we mentioned just a few moments ago. As you remember, Frau Perchta is often represented with the face of a disfigured goat as the guardian of the beasts. Well, that's exactly what Krampus is, right? This half goat demon with this long red tongue. And it's not such a stretch to imagine that Krampus may have been like a church-sanctioned version of Frau Perchta, just embodying the Catholic idea of the devil and placed under the oversight of St. Nicholas. I was interested to find out that the name Krampus is actually of uncertain origin, just because there are two possible origins. On the one side, we've got the Bavarian Krampen, which means death or rotten, and on the other hand, the Germanic Kramp, which means claws. All right, we've had a few kind of dark Christmas fiends. The next one is super disturbing. And this happens in France. And in France, you don't get Krampus, you get Le Père Fouettard, Old Father Whip. Now, depending on the sources, Le Père Fouettard was either a butcher or an innkeeper. And along with his wife, they decided to kidnap some wealthy children. So the story goes that they lured these 3 children into a field, robbed them, killed them, carved them up and cooked them into a stew, and then put that stew into barrels which they put in their cellar. Now, 7 years later, St. Nicholas is walking around in the field and he sees the inn. He goes to the inn and he sits down and he asks the butcher for some food. The butcher brings him delicious foods, ham and veal, but St. Nicholas is sending it all back to the kitchen saying, "This is disgusting." And when the butcher says, "Hey, what's the deal?" he says, "What I'm particularly interested in is the stew that you've had in your cellar for 7 years." At these words, the butcher is terrified. He realizes that he's been found out. He tries to run away, but St. Nicholas stops him. And then he raises 3 fingers and the 3 children climb out of the barrels, resurrected. So the butcher's punishment is an eternity of servitude working for St. Nicholas, going around whipping badly behaved children while St. Nicholas rewards the well-behaved children with sweets and gifts. And finally, to round off this list, let's talk about the Kallikantzaroi. Mostly from Greece, this particular Christmas pest also exists in Turkey, in Serbia, and in Bulgaria. Now, they've got different names in these other countries, but it's essentially the same idea. They're these little gremlin-like creatures that live underground, chopping away all year at the tree of life, which sustains life on Earth. Now, these creatures are defined by 2 main characteristics. Number 1, they're not very bright. Number 2, they don't have a very long attention span. And I know what you're thinking, and no, I am not a Kallikantzaros, but this short attention span of theirs is actually a blessing for mankind, and I'll explain why in a few moments. So there they are all year, underground, chopping and hacking at the tree of life, and then once a year, on Christmas Day, they hear the merriment happening on the surface of the earth. And they get interested, they drop their tools and they start digging their ways up to the surface. And then they'll spread all around the world, wreaking havoc. Again, this is associated with the 12 days of Christmas, right? The time between the 25th of December and the 6th of January, Epiphany. Now, the Kallikantzaroi are said to be afraid of fire, so the people who uphold this tradition will leave a fire burning in their fireplace for the 12 days of Christmas, hoping that that will dissuade any Kallikantzaros from climbing down their chimney and causing havoc inside their household. They'll also leave some food around the house to distract them, just in case they manage to get in anyway. And of course, naturally, the children are all told that if they don't behave properly, then the Kallikantzaroi will eat them, because what's Christmas without that extra little bit of childhood trauma for your psychiatrist to help you untangle later on in life. Like vampires and werewolves, the Kallikantzaroi actually can't bear being in the sun, and actually the name Kallikantzaros may be derived from the Turkish word for werewolf or dark bloodsucker. And so when Epiphany arrives and the sun starts moving around in the sky again, they're forced back underground, where they find that the tree of life has completely healed and they have to start their work all over again. Hooray for ADHD. And that's it. That's my list of creepy, monstrous, gruesome Christmas traditions from around Europe. What did you think? Did I leave any out? I know I focused mostly around Europe, but maybe you've got some equivalent traditions from around the world that you'd like to share with us in the comments. And hey, what do you think of this be good or Gargamel will get you kind of narrative? Do you remember reading any of these types of stories as a child that had any kind of effect on you? One way or another, let me know down below. I'd be really interested to know. And of course, as always, if you'd like to support the channel, you can book a one-to-one video conversation with me where we can talk about your magical practice and maybe give you some pointers and where to go next. Or I can simply read your tarot and we can take the conversation from there. Or you can support my channel through the Patreon, like my level 3 and level infinity members, whose names you can see scrolling up on the left over here. Membership starts at just $2 a month and gives you access to the Foolish Fish Discord. A very special thank you to all the existing members, especially the level infinity members: David Venturini, Caitlin Kopok, Aritz Murueta Ramos, Danny Barr, heckabooks.com.au for all of you esoteric and occult book fans in Australasia, Howard Wolf, Linda Hendricks, Stephen Hunter, and Susanna Red Elves. I hope you've all been very good this year and that it's all silver coins for you and not disembowelments, or maybe at the worst a charcoal-coloured piece of rock candy and a swept floor. I know that's what I'm hoping for, but either way, I hope you all have a lovely Yuletide, Christmas, Epiphany, if you celebrate any of these. And please, as always, look after yourselves and each other. And I'll see you very soon with another video. Bye-bye.